Hey, thank you for coming to March's Ask an Editor. Today we're going to be talking about dialogue and how to write better dialogue, and we hope it's helpful.
My name is Eva Barrows. I'm a developmental editor for fiction and nonfiction books. I do story development coaching, and I also am a publication manager for newsletters.
My name is Lila, and I have LaBine editorial. I copy edit fiction, I beta read specific fiction genres, and I proofread screenplays.
What is the role of dialogue? The role of dialogue in a story is it has many functions. The main thing is to move the story forward and then also activating conflict, tension, and suspense. Dialogue helps to reveal character through what is said and the vocabulary used. It establishes character relationships. It communicates necessary facts and information to the reader, and it reveals emotional states while commenting on the action of the story. And dialogue sets the mood and tone for your story. You always want to ask yourself, what is your dialogue doing? Because dialogue can do, and it should do, more than one thing at a time. Dialogue that is not revealing character you should think about revising it so that it does reveal character. And then dialogue should help answer the question, what happens next? So this is just a sample dialogue. So the character Anna turns to character X. This is a father and daughter. So Anna turned to X, her big black eyes wide with sadness, and her small face streaked with tears. I I didn't mean to. I just wanted to pet it. So the takeaway from this passage is innocence, remorse, shock. The character is well-meaning, but something bad happened. And then the reader wants to know, well, what the heck happened? And then wants to know how this resolves.
I forgot to say that most of our samples today are based on my teenage son's writing. So just want to give him a little credit. Chase Gianelli. Okay, go ahead.
So this is kind of one of the most important things when you're setting up dialogue to think about is every line of dialogue should be driven by what your character wants. So great dialogue happens when characters want different things from each other. Um, and then maybe they want the same thing, but they disagree on how to get it. So when you write a scene, set up conversations by identifying what each character wants in the scene. That's their objective. And then what they both can't get, well, why they both can't get what they want. So that's their obstacle. And then how are they going to try to get what they want? And then when each character wants something, that's going to drive the desires and clashing motivations. And that's going to avoid flat, cliche, wondering conversations. So just to look at this a little bit in action, we're going to go back to the kind of same scenario. So we're having the father X side lowering down to look his daughter in the eyes. Anna, you know why you were created, don't you? Or do you not? Anna sniffled and nodded. To make things die. Yes, and that's what you've just done. I'm proud of you, dear. But it wasn't ready, Anna sobbed. It was just a little baby. It wasn't supposed to. I didn't mean to. Anna, sometimes things die before you think they're meant to, X said. These things happen. I'm sorry. I'm so tired of it. I want to play with something. Why does everything I touch die? What's wrong with me? So you can definitely see here what the daughter wants. She wants to play, but whatever she touches dies. So that's got to be frustrating, right? Um, and then I'm thinking that the father is kind of showing his pride here. Like he knows that she's supposed to have a power, and he's kind of guiding her through that process. Um, and so maybe he might want to protect her or guide her in this situation. So you can see that how that comes out in the dialogue. And then you can use seemingly realistic dialogue to forward the plot. And this means like kind of you can skip pleasantries that, people have in everyday life, like, hi, how are you? How's it going? Like, we don't really need that. We can start the scene where the characters have already, been introduced in the narrative, and then they just, kind of get started with the action. So as characters talk, they learn new information, and they gather clues that move the plot forward. And then the author should be raising the stakes by poking the characters to take action through the conflict that is raised by the dialogue. So again, this is the same situation. So we're talking about Anna is picking up clues about her abilities and the nature of life and death. And it just kind of just from this sample, you can see things are already happening, the action, it's skipping boring greetings, and just getting to the special powers that are pushing at, so the powers themselves are pushing Anna to take action. And then there's ways to make dialogue sound natural. You can have characters assume answers to questions that they have. That's, it's just something that people do, in everyday speech. They cut each other off. They can change the subject. They can give unsolicited advice. They can speak for other characters, and they can become distracted from the conversation. And then in this sample, we can see the hesitation is noted by the ellipsis, and then it's M dash, right, Lila? The
Yeah.
M dash. That's shows that the language is being cut off. So Anna gets cut off by her authority figure father. He breaks into what she's saying. So that's just a sample of that. And then dialogue and exposition. So exposition can be successfully delivered through dialogue. Dialogue can set the scene with information on what's happening, and it's also great for revealing what happened in the past. But you have to be careful of too much exposition, because you don't want characters to talk to the reader, just kind of just telling the reader what they think the author thinks you need to know, so they put it in dialogue. And this should be information that readers can pick up in other ways throughout the story. Just make sure to allow characters to discover and experience the plot instead of just saying it and explaining it. Also, just to get a little bit deeper, it's also called information dumping when you do this. Just make sure you're using the dialogue to move the story forward and not relive the past. It's not a recap of what happened. Have tension drive the story rather than having reflection drive it. And then remember to have characters focused on obtaining their object of desire or their goal. And then I guess we have an example. So too much exposition. This is not Lila's son. So just imagine this. As you know, big brother, Mom's 50th birthday is coming up next month. We need to plan a fancy party for her or she'll disown us, Carol said, fidgeting with the table utensils. Just think how bad she'll make us feel if we don't do anything for her birthday. I know, Paul responds, putting his head in his hands. We'll be forced to withstand our mother's sorrow if her milestone birthday is not perfect. So this is a lot of this is information that the reader can get from the right setup. And then just like saying big brother, like we know that they're brother and sister because they say, mom. And we might not need to know that he's older, maybe not. And then just it's kind of just comes off as melodramatic to me. But then we've got a good sample on the next slide. I think Lila did most of this one. Um, so we need to plan mom's birthday, Carol said. That's a month away. Let's take her out to that Mexican restaurant she loves. What's it called? Paul scanned the drink menu. Carol snorted and rolled her eyes. I think she's expecting a little more than dos compadres for her 50th. She refolded her napkin, then set it down once more. Something fancy. I don't want to get a month-long silent treatment again. So you can see the nice mix of action. There's specifics, like there's the name of the restaurant, and the character goals are clear. They just want to appease their mom. Um, and then also there's like the use of like short sentences, like something fancy, like that's kind of, helping build how this character talks. And then they want to avoid the month-long silent treatment. That's something that they had to, put up with before, so they don't want that again. So you can get a lot more out of this, and it's kind of a little more entertaining to read because you're kind of reading into it and imagining what happened in the past. You want to make sure that you're balancing dialogue with other parts of story. So dialogue passages create white space on the page, and this quickens the pace of reading and builds tension and curiosity for what happens next. So long speeches and instructions most likely are going to slow down the reading pace. So if you do find that there's some slow spots, but this character needs to say a lot, you can add physical action to show the character interacting with other characters in the scene and the environment itself, like we're talking about the napkins and stuff like that. And you can describe how other characters react to what is being said. So one character's saying something, and then you can, like, if they're seeing other people reacting. And then include grounding details of the environment or setting so the reader can picture what's happening. A lot of times there's kind of just talking, this dialogue back and forth. There's just one big chunk of dialogue, and the reader kind of gets lost. They're not sure what the scene looks like and what the characters are doing. And then note the point of view character processing this new information, their internal dialogue and emotional shifts. So while there's talking going on, what is the character thinking? And then how are they, reacting and feeling? So this is just a sample of a dialogue block. So I took the Anna and X and just kind of got rid of, all the other elements and just left it to be dialogue. And you can see where if it just kind of goes on like this, you kind of feel lost. It's just a kind of, I didn't mean to, it was just a baby, I'm so tired of it. And you're not really thinking about, seeing where you are in the story. And then it has room to have a narrative commentary and then other character reactions to kind of, make sure you're still feeling part of the story. This is just participation dialogue. So the same thing, just where you've got the two characters, going back and forth between the two people. And the takeaway of that is it's describing the dead rabbit, it's showing Anna's emotions and giving you a sense of, give and take in the dialogue. Creating subtext. So subtext is what is implied by what is said. And the truth isn't just stated outright, but it's understood by the reader. So some people, and this is just something like a lot of times people don't actually say what they mean in real life. And then characters can lie to each other or withhold information. Two conversations can happen at one time. And that's really where the subtext comes in. The surface conversation says one thing, and the real conversation underneath says something else. Um, One way dialogue can demonstrate who characters are is by what they are willing to say out loud. So just a sample, if you didn't know anything else about the rabbit story and you saw, um, but it wasn't ready, Anna sobbed. It was just a little baby. It wasn't supposed to. I didn't mean to. So the reader can kind of feel Anna's remorse. She's coming to grips with the rabbit's death. She is in disbelief of that she was the one who killed it. So she didn't just outright say, "Oh, I killed it." She's kind of grappling with it, but the reader understands the subtext is that she killed it accidentally. And then I had a question from one of the workshop participants come in, and it was about memoir and dialogue. So the question is, how can you create true to life dialogue in a memoir when you don't remember the conversation? So you can really use a lot of the things I was just talking about, where you would identify the scene, the situation. So whatever, identify the event that you're trying to recreate, and then just be aware of what happened before that event and what happened after. And then keep in mind your character or the person that you're writing about, keep in mind their goal within the scene and what they might have. So you're just kind of thinking, well, what might they have said and done to obtain their goal in the scene? And then the dialogue is going to be is what I call an informed work of the imagination. So it's kind of like it comes off realistic because you know what the end goal is, and that's something that's known, but the conversations that were had, you might not know exactly what was said, but you can kind of be able, based on this character and what they are known to have said and how they say it, I can kind of come up with, what might have been said in this situation, and it will still ring true that way. And then just some tips for self-editing. So go back and identify what each character tries to achieve in the scene, and then how they would use dialogue to get it. So that's again with the goals. And then allow characters to talk to one another without limits. And you can do that in your first draft. You can just have characters talking and then go back and cut it back to the minimum dialogue that you need to, reach those goals for each of those characters. And then just to let you know how a developmental editor can help sharpen dialogue. So developmental editor is going to look at your whole story level, the story as a whole, and they can tell you when narrative and dialogue are communicating the same thing or are saying the same thing in slightly different ways. So sometimes you'll have a narrative where it kind of just lets you know something, and then the character will come out and say it in dialogue. Well, you don't need both, so you can kind of pick which one is more effective and then kind of delete the other. And then editor can help you identify those long passages that could be broken up with action, reaction, replies from other characters. And then they are definitely going to be able to tell you where the story pace is slow and might lose the reader's attention. So you definitely want to, pay attention to those areas and see if you can, kind of quicken the pace and tension there.
That was great. So while Eva concentrates more on like the content of the dialogue, I am looking more as a copy editor or even a line editor. I'm looking more to help you make sure that your readers can easily read your dialogue and enjoy it and just not like stumble over it, because then it pulls them out of the story. So you want to write natural dialogue. Eva gave you some tips, and then on the copy editing side, I always try to make sure that when there are accents or stutters, that they're not overdone to the point that it makes it hard to read or even just annoying to read. Yeah, sometimes they're just, it's too much. So like a character will have an accent, and and I've seen this in books. I'll be reading and I'll be like, it's such a big accent that I can't. Every word looks different than how it usually does, and then it takes away from what's actually happening in the story, and it takes me a long time to read it. And it's just, I'm sure you've experienced that as well. So you just want to be careful that they're not overdone. Same thing with stutters. And then also with accents, you want to be respectful of, so if it's an accent that you are not super familiar with, it's someone from a region that you're not super familiar with, you want to make sure that you're not just stereotyping or overgeneralizing or being disrespectful to that culture or the way those people speak. So you can always check in and have an authenticity reader go through, someone who has experience with that culture or that dialect or whatever it is, just so that you're making sure you're not, being disrespectful. And then another way to make your dialogue sound natural is to use contractions, filler words, sentence fragments. We don't usually speak in complete sentences in our conversations. So make sure that you add that in a little bit. Don't have everything be totally formal unless that's how your character is. You'll have to take into account your character's personalities. So some characters are going to speak more formally than others. Some are you going to use more slang than others. Some are going to be, I don't know, using more sentence fragments and contractions, and some aren't. So you just have to take that into account. And then also continue to remember that you want the dialogue to be easy to read. So I'm going to have some examples that are going to show you what might be too much or too little. No, I don't have any too little examples, but I do have too much. Vocabulary and slang should be appropriate to your story's time period, the setting that your story is in. And you can, so I've seen authors, so say their story is set in the 1940s, and maybe they are just writing everything with using modern language. They've chosen not to try to adapt their characters' dialogue to how people speak in the 1940s. That can be done well if they completely stick to the modern way of speaking. But when a reader finds that, the story is set in the 1940s, a lot of the language is stuff or vocab used in the 1940s, but then all of a sudden you see these little slips of like modern language or modern slang, then it just seems kind of like lazy writing. So you kind of want to choose one or the other. Are you going to be very careful and try to stick with the 1940s language and vocabulary and slang and way of speaking? Or are you going to just completely make this modern dialogue set in the 1940s? You know what I mean? If you have a little bit of both, it just looks like your copy editor didn't do a good enough job, or you didn't take enough time to do some fact checking. And then don't forget to read your dialogue out loud. That's the biggest thing I find that helps me to help my author clients make sure their dialogue sounds natural. When you read it out loud, it's so much easier to see when something sounds like stilted or off. So yeah, just always make sure to read it out loud. So here's an example. Do you know why you're here, Saskia? But because I don't even want to read this, but do you see all the stuttering there? That's a little overdone. If it's just maybe one or two lines, like maybe that character is temporarily incapacitated, they just hit their head or they're in shock and they're speaking that way for, just a sentence or two, that's not a big deal. But if this is a character who regularly stutters, like that's their way of speaking, you're not going to want to add so much of the stuttering in. Instead, what you can do is kind of mention every now and then that they're stuttering, kind of like, I know it's more of telling than showing, but in this case, it's actually a little helpful. Just every now and then, like, mention the stuttering. And then you can add in just a couple. So you can see in the better example, I left the because and the can't, but I took everything else out. That makes it so much easier to read. And then same thing applies for accents. Here's another example. She sat near her, just far enough to be out of punching range. Are you all right? I am fine, Samantha said. I do not understand why we are worrying about feelings at a time like this. So these two characters, you don't know, but they're teenagers. And I tried to just add in some contractions. And yeah, I changed all, are you all right, to you good. You can see below there. You good? I'm fine, Samantha said. I don't understand why we're worrying about feelings at a time like this. Now, if I were younger, I could probably make that sound even more teenager-ish, but I'll leave that to my son. So yeah, you just want to, those contractions really make a difference. I often see my clients, it seems that they think that contractions are not good writing, when especially in dialogue, I think they're important and very helpful. It just, we don't usually speak in like without contractions. So don't be afraid to use them. Here's another example. Tessa nodded. Yeah, and you, well, you might want to apologize to Charlie and Tier. You hurt Charlie's feelings and you hurt Tier's face. So that's fine. You know, that's probably how we talk. We use a lot of filler words. We say we say like, we hesitate, we trail off. But you want, when you're writing, you want to find that fine line between authenticity, like natural dialogue, and easy to read. So you're going to do a little less stuttering, hesitation, filler words, and all that than you would hear in real life, just to make it easier for the reader. So here I just took out a little bit. I took out the ellipses around and I took out the well and the repetition of you. So Tessa nodded. Yeah. And you might want to apologize to Charlie and Tier. You hurt Charlie's feelings and you hurt Tier's face. It felt like that last ellipsis was actually really, you know, is important because it kind of gave that, it's a little comedic kind of. And then when you're punctuating dialogue, it can get really tricky. There are so many like little specific situations where even I have to look stuff up all the time when I'm copy editing. So don't feel bad if it's difficult, but it is helpful to know a few of the basic dialogue punctuation rules so that it's easier for you, easier for your editor. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of those here. So when you're stuttering and it's just a part of a word, like a sound in a word, you're just going to use a hyphen between those sounds. So because, so you're just going to have a hyphen there. Same thing with the can't. When you're stuttering to, like, when they're stuttering a whole word, like they can go now. Then you use an em dash. A lot of people don't know that, but now you know. And then Eva kind of mentioned this already, but I see authors mix this up a lot. Ellipses are used only when you are trailing off or hesitating. They're not for interruptions. If a character is being interrupted, you're using that em dash. And then most of you probably know this, but in US English, commas and ending punctuation always go within the quotation marks. You'll see it differently in UK English, but I think we're speaking mostly to US authors here. So, but yeah, so you see that question mark after Saskia goes inside the quotation marks. The comma before the dialogue tag she said goes before the quotation marks, not after. And then another thing I see often mixed up are dialogue tags and action beats. Dialogue tags, they're separate things. So dialogue tags are like kind of the way you say something and who's saying it. So she said, he replied, they asked. That's a dialogue tag. And it's going to be a part of the same sentence that the dialogue is in. So, what a lovely name, she said. That's all one sentence. She isn't capitalized because it's all part of that sentence. And there's a comma, not a period, used before she said. An action beat is an action. It's not the way you're saying something. So you don't shrug words. And that's why she shrugged is its own separate sentence. So you're not going to need the comma. You're going to have, I don't know, period, and then she shrugged. So there's some there are some arguments between editors, you know, like what exactly is a dialogue tag and what isn't. So sometimes an author will say like, no, she laughed. And I can kind of see how you can maybe laugh a no, you know, like no, that can sometimes work. Some editors will say, no, that is an action beat. She laughed should be its own separate sentence. So, but for the most part, something like she shrugged, you don't shrug words. So you're just going to have that in its own separate sentence, and that changes the punctuation. And then you want to make sure you're using dialogue tags wisely. Not every line of dialogue needs a dialogue tag. You only need to use dialogue tags when it might be unclear who's speaking, or when, you know, there's been back and forth between two characters speaking, and it's been a while since there's been any sort of clarification. Then you don't want readers to get lost and have to, you know, go back up and be like, wait a minute, okay, who's speaking? So that just helps. I'm going to have some examples. And then don't be afraid to use said and asked most of the time. A lot of us maybe were taught in middle school or high school that said is dead, but that's not real. That's not good advice. So we were taught to, you know, find any other word to besides said. But really, no, said is to readers, said is pretty invisible. And that helps us focus more on the dialogue itself instead of being distracted by that crazy dialogue tag. There is sometimes in audiobooks, it will be a little more noticeable, the repetition of said. But even then, that's why you're supposed to use dialogue tags only when needed. So you can use action beats to show who's speaking, and I'll have that in the example coming up. But yeah, so it's okay to use said a lot. That's all right. So, what a lovely name, she said, closing the metal box. Do you know why you're here, Saskia? Because I can do things that other little girls can't. What a clever girl. How old are you, Saskia? I'm 6. Tears formed in my eyes, blurring my vision. When can I go home? So you see, there's only one dialogue tag in that little conversation there that she said. We know, because I can do things that other little girls can't, we know that's Saskia speaking because that's who she's talking to. So, and it's in its own paragraph because with each new speaker, you have a new paragraph. So we know we don't need that. And then again, we know because we know it's back and forth talking. We know that what a clever girl is the very first person, same person speaking. And then we have the action beat, tears formed in my eyes, blurring my vision. So we know, again, if you're reading the whole thing, it's easier to tell, but we know that that is the narrator again. So you don't need, dialogue tags with every line of dialogue. So here's those interesting dialogue tags, which by the way are okay to use. You just don't avoid using said and asked, but it's okay every now and then. Sometimes they do serve a good purpose, and that's fine. But here is a case where it's been overused. I'm fine, Samantha huffed. Yes, you are, he joked. You are so annoying, she responded. Thanks, baby, he shot back. So see how it's a little much, and also it's just so kind of repetitive in the structure of the dialogue and the tags. So something better would be to throw in some action beats, to maybe have a line of dialogue without a tag. Samantha crossed her arms over her chest. I'm fine. Yes, you are. He laughed at his own joke. You are so annoying. He winked. Thanks, baby. So that's a little more, it's sounds better. It's more enjoyable to read, more entertaining, and it's not so repetitive in its structure. Okay, so copy editors help you with the more detailed aspects of your dialogue, of the conversations in your story. We can point out where stutters and accents might be overdone or incorrectly done or stereotyped, and maybe you want to get the help of an authenticity reader. Some copy editors do both. It depends. You'll have to ask. We can give suggestions for how to make your characters' dialogue sound more natural, like more tailored to their personalities. So sometimes I'll see a line of dialogue and I'll be like, that doesn't really sound like something this character would say. And I'll just point that out in a comment. That way the author can take a look at it again and decide whether they want to keep it that way. I will spot words that aren't typical for that time period. If you're writing historical fiction, it can sometimes be very helpful to find a copy editor who is very experienced in historical fiction or in a specific time period, because then they're going to notice more things than like I would. I don't do a lot of historical fiction. So that can always be helpful if you are writing historical fiction. Just see if you can find a copy editor who regularly does that. And then so if I'm reading through as the copy editor and I see like, oh man, it's kind of hard for me to follow this conversation. I'm not exactly sure who's speaking when, and sometimes I have to leave comments, just like, can you clarify who's speaking here? So we can help you with that. And then of course the whole dialogue punctuation, we are experts on that and we know how to research and figure out the answers when we don't know about a certain punctuation situation. So next month we're going to be talking about, the topic is how can I stop writing boring stories? So if you're worried that your story or your writing is not interesting enough, or you've had maybe some negative feedback that your stories are hard to get through, make sure to join us. It is April 16th at 11 a.m. like always, and you can register at either of the links below.